Now for today's program. Rabbi Ellen Bernstein is an eco-theologian, spiritual leader, writer, and creative. She founded the first national Jewish environmental organization, Shomrei Adamah, Keepers of the Earth, in 1988. She also created the first ecologically centered Tu B'Shvat Seder and popularized Tu B'Shvat as a community-wide interspiritual ecological art celebration for all peoples. Ellen writes, teaches, and presents on the ecology of Judaism and the Hebrew Bible, and serves on the advisory board of the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology and the Green Sabbath Project. She is the author of several books, including The Promise of the Land, a Passover Haggadah, which is the first comprehensive ecological Haggadah for Passover. Ellen's newest work, Toward a Holy Ecology, Reading the Song of Songs in the Age of Climate Crisis, will be released in February. Rabbi Natan Margalit, who was raised in Honolulu, Hawaii, is founder of the nonprofit Organic Torah, which is a program of Aleph, Alliance for Jewish Renewal, fostering holistic thinking about Judaism, environment, and society. He is interim dean of faculty and a member of the steering committee of the Aleph Ordination Program and serves as chair of their rabbinic text department. Natan is also the director of AOP's Earth-Based Judaism program. He has taught at Bard College, the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, and the Rabbinical School of Hebrew College. Natan is the author of The Pearl and the Flame, A Journey into Jewish Wisdom and Ecological Thinking. Joining Rabbi Bernstein and Rabbi Margalit is Moment Digital editor Noah Phillips. Noah is a former resident of Urban Adamah, a Jewish teaching farm in Berkeley, California, and a board member of Pisces, a small organic teaching farm in the Suvans region of Togo in West Africa. He is a former resident of Flux Factory, an art collective in New York City. Please welcome Rabbi Ellen Bernstein, Rabbi Natan Margalit, and Noah Phillips.
I'm so excited to welcome Rabbis Ellen and Natan. I met them both earlier this summer at the Aleph Kala, at the Aleph gathering, and people were just buzzing about Ellen Bernstein's teachings and Ecological Torah. And the last time I saw Natan in person, he was jumping onto a moving golf cart, which I found very impressive. I was driving the golf cart. So without further ado, let me kind of frame our conversation. Everyone knows about environmentalism. Everyone knows that you're supposed to recycle. Everyone knows that our planet is in pretty serious trouble. Not everybody knows what Judaism really has to say about that. And of course, Judaism is a very deep and very broad and very multifaceted thing to just like say it's a concept. But basically, what we're hoping to do today is go pretty deep on what our tradition, on Torah, our holidays, our kind of ways of thinking can teach us about how to exist in this time, in this place, on this planet. So if the term Jewish ecology is something that you haven't really come across before, if it's unfamiliar, don't worry, you're in the right place. Grab a drink of water, take a seat, be comfortable, and let's start. So Ellen, our first question is for you. You founded the first national Jewish environmental organization, Shomrei Adamah, which means guardians of the earth. Maybe you have a different translation. But like people, like Shomer Shabbos, being like a guardian, a keeper of Shabbat. It's the same kind of Shomrei. So Shomrei Adamah, that was 35 years ago. Can you tell us a little bit about the whole arc of your career and any projects you've worked on that have been most meaningful to you?
Sure. Thank you so much. And it's a delight that we're doing this. So just how I got to Shomrei Adamah to begin with is that I was always an outdoor kid and really interested in the natural world. Very excited that I was actually able to participate in one of the first environmental studies programs in the United States at UC Berkeley in 1971. So when I graduated from UC Berkeley, the only thing you could really do with an environmental studies degree was do environmental impact statements, which never really interested me. And I also, so I actually ended up teaching high school ecology for a couple of years. And what it just felt like to me that my students really weren't into the science. And what I realized I could do was teach them great ecological literature to get them engaged. And I taught them all these great nature writers, and it was really fun and exciting. And then at the same time, I was kind of on my own spiritual path. I'm Jewish by birth, but didn't have much of a great Jewish upbringing. And I was just really hungry spiritually. And I actually started studying the biblical portion of the week with a friend in Berkeley. And I couldn't believe how much, like, we couldn't get through Genesis 1. It was so rich with nature wisdom when you really go deeply and look kind of like word by word and unpacking the words. And I just wondered, there must be a Jewish environmental organization around. I mean, it was already, this is 35 years ago, but we were already seriously thinking about it. And it just seemed like this was a great way to capture the imagination of young people. And I looked for 5 years, couldn't find anything. And ultimately, I moved to Philadelphia, and I was kind of in a Reconstructionist neighborhood. And people say, I would ask, is there a Jewish environmental organization? People would say, no, and you have to start one. So that was the beginning of Shomrei Adamah. What we did in the beginning was we really launched Shomrei Adamah with Tu B'Shvat, the Jewish New Year of the Trees, and sort of contextualizing Tu B'Shvat ecologically, based on the Kabbalistic Seder, which I'm not going to go into at any length now. And we did a whole Green Synagogues project. We had a newsletter. We ran wilderness trips, a few, and wrote a curriculum for high school, which was called Let the Earth Teach You Torah. And so this went on. I ran Shomrei Adamah for about 10 years. And, we pulled together a lot of Jewish ecological knowledge, but it never felt like, I sort of always intuited that there was an ecological through line throughout the Bible, but I couldn't really see exactly what that was. It was more like everybody was cherry picking verses here and there from Jewish texts in the Bible. And but I always felt like there was something deeper. And so what I've really been doing since Shomrei Adamah closed is doing my own work on studying Torah from asking ecological questions to see what ecological wisdom would unfold.
Can I pause you for a second? Sure. Because you said something so deep as just kind of a throwaway comment or as a throwaway reference. Let the earth teach you Torah. I mean, that's pretty incredible just to contemplate that. I mean, don't you have to study Torah in a yeshiva? Don't you have to order all the books that Natan has behind him, and in all these various languages to make sure that you learn Torah properly? What do you mean, let the earth teach you Torah?
Well, that's actually a quote from Job. And we have all these kinds of great quotes throughout our tradition. And actually, that's a good question, because it's like you really need to study the tradition to see how that idea is actually alive in our tradition. So actually, a lot of what I've been doing in the last 20 years is just trying to understand how Torah, the meaning of the word earth, the land, the earth, which is Eretz, it's the same word, but what does that word actually mean in Torah? Generally, we consider it to be the land of Israel, and we just see it in the particular instead of seeing it in the universal. We see it as real estate or territory, as opposed to seeing the earth as a living organism. And I think that the ancients, for them to have that language of let the earth teach you Torah, they understood that as well. So just to say a tiny bit more, so in the last many years, I've written a couple of books, The Promise of the Land, which is reading the Passover from the Passover Seder from an ecological perspective, with a whole understanding of land and how land enters into the story. So that's what I sort of retrieved this language from the Bible and brought it back to the Haggadah. And then most recently, really taken a deep dive into the Song of Songs, because the Song of Songs to me is the most ecological book in our.
What is the Song of Songs? Tell us what the Song of Songs is. Just like.
The Song of Songs is a book of the Bible, part of the writings, and it's like the storyline is about a male and a female. They're two characters, and about their love, and the way that the Song of Songs has been understood mainly in our tradition as an allegory, in which the male figure is God and the female is Israel. And basically, but the language of the natural world is incredibly vibrant in the Song of Songs, and I've wanted to capture that and let people see how profound the Song of Songs is as a work of ecological literature. And for me, it belongs in the canon that should be taught in the canon of environmental literature, not just as religious, but that, but part of a whole of what a student would learn in college in terms of understanding environmental ideas. So anyway, that's
beautiful. Well, hopefully we'll have time to dive into more of this. The Song of Songs, for anyone who hasn't read it, is very steamy and very, very engaging. But Natan, let's pivot to you for a moment, and maybe you can help us zoom out and in your new book, The Pearl and the Flame, which I happen to have here, you talk about Judaism also as an ecological religion. And maybe you could help us understand better what Jewish ecology means and what some examples.
Yeah. Thank you, Noah. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Well, maybe I'll just jump in, because that what you were talking about, let the earth teach you Torah, is also, I think, really evocative, and it relates very much to the kind of things that I like to talk about, because, in the mystical tradition, we say that the world of nature, that the earth is actually Torah on another kind of plane. They're both Torah. We've got like the Torah that can be written down in words on a parchment and put into books and things, but that's really only one level of Torah. And in fact, the earth actually also is Torah. And we say, that starts, it goes back to our original, again, Genesis, the idea that God creates the world with language by saying, let there be light, let there be. And so again, when the rabbis said, like, well, it wasn't just language, it was also like the letters. And so the letters of the Torah actually are in the world in the mystical sense. So that when we say that the Torah is the tree of life, it's the tree of life, that metaphor, like it really is what I really think a lot about, is that the Torah really is ecological in the same way that an ecosystem is ecological. And what do I mean by that? It's all about the interconnectedness. That's the real main thing. When you talk about like ecological thinking, or how can we find ecology, it's like, well, the essence of ecology is, how do we make the connections? Like, we have so many things in our modern world, and so many things have taken us in the direction of separating ourselves, saying like, well, we're really the only ones that matter. It's like, and these they're just like out there as resources for us, and we can break everything down like a machine. And really, this is where we created a lot of the progress of the modern world let me just try to put this down so that it doesn't shake around. It's actually my phone because two of my computers didn't work today. Let me just see here. Yeah, it's not working to put it down immediately. So let me try and hold it steady. Yeah, we created, like, with the scientific revolution, that was the first time back in the 17th century when they said, you know what, enough of this Mother Earth and stuff. Like the world is a machine, and we can control and predict and measure. And that was like a real heady kind of drug for people. It was a sense of power. And we did create the modern world with incredible things, and I'm not against a lot of the things that we enjoy, and yet that metaphor of the world as machine really had a lot of negative consequences, and a lot of that had to do with separating ourselves out from the world. And now what we're starting to see is like, no, you know what? That's gone far enough. We need to have like a different kind of science, like ecology, which says how everything's connected. And when I look at Torah, what I look at is that, like, the Torah it's not organized the way we would organize a normal, like a Western book. It's not like a philosophical treatise or a novel even. It's like, if you open any of the books of the Torah, and especially these books behind me, like the Talmud, the Midrash, it can be a little bit intimidating because it'll ask a question and it'll give you 5 different answers. And then it'll jump around, it'll be on a subject and it'll jump to another thing. It's like, well, this thing needs an editor. And in fact, doesn't need an editor. In fact, the Torah is actually created on an organic model.
Well, let's kind of just like zoom into that for a second, because people might not be familiar with like ecological thinking, and we're using it in a kind of creative or maybe metaphorical or maybe not kind of way. But like, ecological thinking is, you're out taking a walk in the woods near your house and you see a chipmunk, and you think, oh, well, there's a chipmunk. But if you're using an ecological framework, you're not just looking at the chipmunk, you're thinking, well, where does the chipmunk sleep and what does the chipmunk eat? And so then you can follow the chipmunk through kind of its life in the forest, and then gradually it'll touch everything, because the chipmunk will leave droppings, and then the droppings will decompose, and there will be some fungus there, and then the fungus will feed some of those nutrients to a tree, and then the tree will grow, and then there will be a bird's nest in there. And like, similarly, if you take an idea like earth or marriage or anything in the Talmud or in Torah, and you're like, okay, well, what's the Jewish take on, I don't know, on
Right.
brushing your teeth?
No, you're right. Everything is like, it's connected. Everything's connected to everything else. And there's one of those things, like if you're walking in a forest, like one of the things that I think about is that, like, it looks messy. There's branches down, there's this, and it's like you got to step over that and everything, but there's no waste. Nothing in there is waste if it's a natural system. Even the dead trees are decomposing and creating environment for bacteria and fungi, and those are creating environments for everything else. And it's the same with Torah. No matter where you start, it's all connected. So you can go in. So you want to find out, like, where does it talk about, like, all the stories about Mount Sinai and Moses going up to this, all the stories about the thunder and lightning and Moses getting the Torah. Well, that's in the tractate of Shabbat. That's all. What does that have to do with Shabbat? Well, you'd have to dive in, because it's like they're all connected, and it's not like something that you can just look at, oh, I'm going to find this subject here. It's all interconnected. And it reminds me, one of the things that we have in our tradition, the Baal Shem Tov, founder of Hasidism, said this, and Rabbi Jonathan Sachs wrote a beautiful little book about this idea that every Jew is a letter in the Torah. And that, I love that, because it connects us to the Torah, but it also connects us to our society and the way we practice Judaism. Because when we experience Judaism, you can't do it by yourself. Like, and he says, like, every Jew is a letter. That means that every family is a word, and every community is a sentence. And the whole, like, the Jewish people today might be a paragraph, or the Jewish people throughout history is a whole story. And the thing about that is that like none of us has meaning on our own. We only find meaning when we're in the context of the whole. And that's the same as an ecosystem. Might be a very nice tree, but it really only works in context of the other trees and the roots and the fungi and that squirrel and the birds. And it won't work on its own. So that's why I say, like, Judaism in its very essence teaches us a way of thinking about how we connect and how we look at the whole and not just break things into their parts.
So we're going to pivot back to you, Ellen, in a second, but I also, just because I'm aware that a lot of people don't really know what the Talmud is either. So the Talmud is a kind of compendium of a centuries-long conversation between these different early rabbis after the first temple was destroyed by the Romans. Temple Judaism was no longer viable, and so basically a bunch of men, happened to be men, not happened to be men, it was because of the patriarchy, but that's another story. A bunch of rabbis started talking about how to apply Torah to their new circumstances, and basically told anecdotes and folk wisdom and many tractates were written to kind of tease out what the different what Jewish life was going to look like for the next 2,000 years. So now 2,000 years later, here we are, and the Talmud is part of what a lot of Jews study. So, Ellen, I have a question for you, but do you have any just response to what Natan was talking about?
Yeah, I actually do. I just want to say that just in terms of that, the connection, like Natan was talking about how everything in Torah is connected, and one of my pet peeves actually is that I'm not sure that people are aware of this, but there's a huge critique out there of biblical religion, of the Judeo-Christian tradition in terms of environment, because of the Genesis 1:28, which talks about dominion and God giving dominion to humanity. And a lot of environmentalists have been very critical of this and have said this is the reason that because God gives humanity dominion over the earth in Genesis, that's why we're in this horrible situation that we're in today.
Should I read the passage?
What?
Should I read Genesis 1:28? I have it right here.
Sure.
Just so you know what we're talking about.
Yep.
God just created humans. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fertile and increase, fill the earth and master it, and rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and all the living things that creep on earth."
Right, but the rule is often translated as have dominion. And the problem is that people who have never studied Judaism, Christianity, the Bible, maybe have never even looked at it, just take this one line out of context, and they've never read all of Genesis 1, in which God proclaims all of creation. The first thing that God's doing is proclaiming every aspect of the natural world to be good, and that what's very good at the end, God claims that what's very good is everything interacting together. And so it's just been this huge pet peeve of mine, because there's been millions of articles written like critiquing Genesis 1:28. And it's a lot of times it's by people who have not really studied the text. And you really have to get deeply into the text and understand its relationship to other texts in order to even be commenting on it. So anyway, that's my response to what Natan was saying.
Well, one thing I'm noticing is, so hopefully we've made the case now that Judaism, Jewish tradition, Jewish ways of thinking have some insights about, or is analogous in some way to ecological thinking. But how can Judaism actually help us today in the real world? Like, what does this perspective offer us in terms of tools?
You're talking to me, right?
Talking to both of you. But
all right,
yes,
well,
you first.
Well, go ahead.
Well, for some of the primary things, to me, the most obvious things it offers is Shabbat to begin with. Like Shabbat is this amazing institution of rest that Judaism gave to the world. And these, so of basically unplugging, right, from all of our devices, from taking from the natural world, and having a day to, get in touch with who we are, get in touch with community, get in touch with the natural world. It feels like a very important, it's so simple, but it feels like this critical thing that we're not doing in our lives. And it's just gotten worse and worse as technology has increased so much. Similarly, the holidays, all of our holidays have some ecological connection. And I feel like for me, one of Judaism's primary gifts is it teaches us how to live in the world through these celebrations, so that in every season of the year, we get to taste and feel and experience the natural world. So, for example, obviously, right, it's Sukkot right now, and we get to sit in our Sukkot every night of the week, invite guests. To me, it's an experience also that we can offer the world. I'm very interested in what aspects of Judaism have to give to the world, not just to Jews, but because so many people are suffering around environmental grief, environmental anxiety. Like, how can we help? What do we have in Judaism that can help? And I feel like our holidays are fantastic. So Sukkot, obviously, Tu B'Shvat, the Jewish New Year of the trees. Who else has a Jewish New Year? Who else has the New Year of the trees? And that one of the things that I've been doing since I founded Shomrei Adamah is holding public celebrations of the New Year of the trees, big arts and music festivals, where the whole community is invited, and we're teaching ecological wisdom out of Jewish tradition through Tu B'Shvat.
And just to lift up the Sukkot connections even more, people may not know, a sukkah, you're supposed to build it outside. It's supposed to be pretty open to the elements. It's supposed to be built, the roof, which is kind of the critical part of the sukkah, is supposed to let in the rain if it rains. It's supposed to be built out of natural materials, like leafy stuff. And what are you supposed to do in this sukkah other than make merry with your friends, which is awesome. It's great that that's a commandment, that you're supposed to make merry with your friends in this tree fort that you build. But you're supposed to shake these 4 species. An etrog, kind of like a lemon, and willow and myrtle and palm, which you're supposed to have some ecological awareness and gather these materials and do what some people call a rain dance. Basically you're praying for, in some circles they say now, and it does culminate with this prayer for rain,
right. And also the commandment is to dwell in the sukkah, just to sit there and take in the natural world. We're not doing anything other than the rituals, but just dwelling there and feeling what it feels like to be, in the shelter of God's wings, basically.
Yeah, Sukkah. I love Sukkot, and we always have a beautiful sukkah and have people over, and it's one of those things that's just like intrinsically joyful. And what is so joyful about it? It feels like, we part of the whole idea of Sukkot is this idea of a vulnerability. It's like, don't think that your security comes from the brick and mortar and your bank account and all of those things. Like, just go out there and, yes, build yourself a shelter. Don't, like, you're not gonna like give up and just lie on the ground, but build yourself a shelter, but understand that you're not the only one, that you're part of like a network of gifts, and all of those species that we're shaking and all of those leaves that create our roof. It's like we do our part, but we're also understand that we're part of something larger, and we need to make ourselves vulnerable and stop this illusion that we can control everything, because that's one of our big problems in our world. It's like we want to be able to like control everything and make everything sterile and put it all in plastic, and it basically cuts us off from experiencing. That's why people just like love to go camping. Like, food tastes better when you're out camping for some reason, even if it's got little bits of dirt in it, because like you're connected, and everything just feels more alive. I mean, one of the things that I think about with, a lot of the ecological writers, they all seem to agree that, like, in order to create the conditions for getting out of these crises, we're in the crisis of the climate, of the species loss, of the environment, all of these crises, we're going to need more than just technical fixes. We all seem to agree that we need more than just like, okay, this scientist is going to come along and save us. We all actually need to like shift the way we're thinking. And so all of these examples, they are wonderful examples, and they teach us something underlying. And some of them have to do directly with nature, like Sukkot. Some of them you're maybe not quite sure what's the, Shabbat, keeping the Sabbath. Well, the Sabbath teaches us that we're not machines. It says we have rhythms just like everything else in nature. There's light and dark, there's winter, there's summer, and so we can't go 24/7. No living being can go without actually the rhythm of like rest and activity. And so it teaches us about like being like the natural world, being in rhythm. When we have our prayers, ideally, we can't do a lot of things in Judaism without a minyan. We can't read Torah without a minyan. We can't say Kaddish. There are so many things so that's one of the principles that I talk about. It's like, well, the minyan is actually teaches us something about, we are not meant to be just individual isolated atoms floating around. We are meant to be in community. We are meant to be connected. And the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And we feel that when you go and you're in this community, everybody's singing together, there's a presence that you can feel that you can't just recreate on your own. And it's the same presence. I think in some ways it's very similar to the presence that you feel when you're out in a beautiful forest or on a seashore, and you see how everything fits there. Like we said, there's no waste there. Everything seems to be like creating a larger whole that is alive and vibrant, and we sense that. And so when we come together in a minyan, that's also teaching us we got to be just like nature. We have to be in these groups, creating a whole, and our life takes on meaning when we're part of something larger. So Judaism, I think, like works so many ways to teach us those deeper lessons of how can we shift our whole way of thinking, so that we're thinking about like not just the parts. How can I fit into a whole? How can I be like the fractal reality? Just like the world of nature is fractal. You've got cells and you've got organs and you've got the body and you've got the family. And it's not an either or, it's a both and. The cell can't exist without the organ. So we also have that in Judaism. We have our individual, but we also have our community. And then we have the Jewish people. And then we have the rest of the world. The fact that we're loyal to our Jewish community doesn't contradict the fact that we also care about the rest of humanity, and we care about the entire planet. those are not either or, they're both and. And so that's a fractal way of looking at the world, which is another sort of ecological lesson that Judaism can teach us.
Not only because of the minyan that you're talking about, but in your book you also talk about the mikdash and like these sort of nested
Exactly.
in the holy of holies in the temple. And
right, in my book I talk about these three core principles of Judaism that are connected to core principles of systems thinking or ecological thinking. And so one of them is the mem for minyan is about emergence, which is the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, and that's all life is about the whole. You know, any organism has to be whole, or else it can't be alive. You also have the mikdash, another mem, which is a sanctuary. And we say, you know, we have a sanctuary. You go into your temple, your shul, and there's a sanctuary there, but also we are sanctuaries. We say like our individual heart is a sanctuary. And then you have the holy land of Israel. That's another one. And then the earth itself, as Ellen was saying, that's also another sanctuary. So that's our principle of like fractal, not either or, but both and. And then the final mem is mitzvah. This idea, and this is really important for ecological action, because what is a mitzvah? We say it's a good deed, it's a commandment, but a mitzvah is a small action that you do because it's the right thing to do, because it's a mitzvah, and it might change everything, but it might not. And we say in systems thinking and in chaos theory, you know, a small action can have huge effects. We're seeing that in climate now. We're seeing that, like, you know, a small change in temperature can throw the whole system off. And in the positive sense, you can send one email and it can go viral and it can change like a whole community, a whole world can be changed. You never know when your small action can actually have a huge effect. And that's the idea of a mitzvah. Yes, it's a small action. Go help that person across the street. Go shake that lulav, whatever the mitzvah is. No, that's not going to make a difference. But that's how Judaism is built, on small actions. And those actions may just change the world. But you're doing it because it's a mitzvah. It's the right thing to do. Maybe the mitzvah is like, go to that meeting, or like write that letter to the editor. Those could be a mitzvah too.
So we have, I hear, a lot of questions from the audience. Ellen, I have one last question for you before we pivot to the questions from the audience. Although if you'd like to respond, then that's welcome too. But my question for you is that this can be such, you know, you talked about ecological grief or environmental grief, and it can be so devastating to read about these species that are going extinct, and wildfires and floods and all kinds of chaos, all kinds of environmental chaos. So and you've been doing this work for so long. So how do you recharge? What inspires you? And what's happening now in this conversation? Are you seeing more attention? What's uplifting you these days?
Well, there's so much more. There's so much terrible stuff going on, but there's so much more good stuff going on. And just for example, there's just so many more people writing and thinking and you know, creating art and music. And there's so many ways, there's so many entry points for people to engage ecologically, but it's like finding the way that does it for people. And I think for me, I've found a way for myself, right? I'm doing I'm doing this work that I don't see very many other people doing at all. And so I feel like I found a particular niche for myself. But I'm inspired by nature all the time. And I feel like by trees and by the mycelial networks and by the fact that the earth can sequester carbon, and that if we were only using traditional and indigenous farming techniques all over the world, we'd be sequestering tons of carbon. So there are so many possibilities of good things that we could be doing that we're not necessarily doing. But I feel like the ways to overcome the grief is to find a way to engage. to find, when I feel really bad, I either like go into nature, get more involved in, like, learn more, listen to music, or work, like find ways that, from to express myself ecologically, in an ecologically positive way. And I just feel like, one of the problems for people is that they don't know how to engage. And I guess there's certainly all the political ways to get involved, but there's a million other ways. And I think we need to take more risks in terms of like reaching out, reading things that you might not ordinarily have read, just to learn more there, so that you can, for myself, I need to like take in stuff from the world. I need to read other people's work, see what other people are doing in order to like light my own fire. But that means like reaching out a lot. So that's something. And I'm always happy to, to talk to individuals and help them along their path and like, brainstorm what would work for them.
He's a rabbi, folks.
Yeah. So, I mean, if I can jump in, the part of it is, as Ellen said, there's all this terrible stuff going on, but on the other hand, there's like a lot of amazing things going on. And what I think people don't necessarily realize is that like how actually satisfying and joyful it is when you're doing this stuff. It's like, it's not necessarily, you maybe, a little bit of like effort up front, but then it's like, it's so much, it's actually so much what we need to be doing this stuff. Like, so what, I mean, I'm very into composting. You talk about like sequestering carbon, and so composting sequesters all of that food waste. Everybody can do this. Even if you subscribe to a service, or you have a community thing, or you even just have a little space in your backyard, you can take those kitchen scraps, and instead of sending them to the landfill where they're going to turn into methane and contribute to the global warming, you can sequester that in the earth. And it's not just an abstract thing. When you're doing that, I mean, I find this to be one of the most satisfying and spiritual things that I do, because like I'll put those kitchen scraps into the compost, and then a couple months later, I'll take them out and I'll put that compost into my garden, and then I can grow those vegetables, and then I'll eat those vegetables, and then I'll cut the peels off the vegetables and put them in the compost. And so I can experience that connectedness, the cycle, rather than just like out of sight, out of mind, throw it into the garbage. That's actually a very unsatisfying way, but it's a very satisfying way when we can engage. And the same thing with community. The more we can actually find ourselves in community and doing things locally, join a CSA, go out to the farm. We've had different kind of arrangements of a community supported agriculture where you go out to the farm, you can pick some of your own, you create community, and you also get like really great local fruits and vegetables. And so I just think that part of what keeps inspiring me is that it's just so much more fun and satisfying to do these ecological kind of things, even though it might be a little bit off the mainstream. But if you like take a chance, as Ellen said, and like put a little something in and try it, it's actually really it feels like the way humans should be living on the earth.
Well, let's transition to questions from the audience. I just, on the subject of compost, have one little thing to share, which is when I was a resident at Organic Adamah, which is this Jewish urban farm in Berkeley, there's this blessing in the daily liturgy, in the Amidah, about blessed are you, Adonai, who resurrects the dead. And that's such a, belief in literal, you die and then you're resurrected when the Messiah comes, and then you go have a party in Jerusalem. That's kind of a stretch for a lot of Jews today, including me. So I'm convinced that applies to compost. This recreation, there's this, your old meal, it's all dead. It's just carrots, carrot stems, and it's not or in coffee grounds, and it's dead basically. But then you put it back into the earth and you compost it, and then it's a new plant, and it's totally miraculous. So anyway, that's
yeah. I got to follow, because like I say that blessing when I compost, because I think it's a mitzvah to compost. And that blessing, that what you said when you were in that standing silent prayer, the Amidah, the language there for like the raising of the dead is matzmiach Yeshua. It says to sprout. Salvation will sprout. And I think I agree with you. That's not a coincidence. I think it does go back to composting.
So we can have a whole new Zoominar just on composting. You also have a great story in your book about composting. But we only have 8 minutes left for questions. I can't believe how fast that went.
Okay, lots of questions here. So this is very interesting. Someone said, I'm so uplifted by this conversation, but it's only available due to technology that can be harmful to the earth. So I must always ask, at what cost? How do you answer this question?
And let's keep the answers relatively short so we can get to as many questions as possible.
I think we're always balancing, it's like we need this technology. It opens up new things, but then we have to figure out like how we can make the technology work for us and not work for itself or work for the corporations that are profiting from it. So it's a maturing process. I think that we need technology, and technology can be very good, but we need to work with it so it's actually serving us and serving the earth. And I think that can be done, but it's a process.
And I just want to say that, like, in one way I think about this is like, how much do I fly? Do I not fly? I went through a period of, actually through the pandemic, I didn't fly at all, but I was really thinking about how much do I want to fly to do speaking engagements on behalf of the earth. And so basically, I think about that. I won't go for one event. I'd have to have like at least, like 5 different events that I'm doing, that I'm really speaking at, where there's a significant number of people that I'm reaching. So, but it's balancing all those things. And I try not to be dogmatic, but, just really, it's a balancing act.
Thank you. Someone else who is a teacher in a Jewish day school and wants to connect them to nature. How can I translate these concepts into their worlds to help them uncover these connections for themselves?
Well, for one thing, I have a curriculum, Let the Earth Teach You Torah. You could take a look at that. There's various other curricula out there. I don't really work too much with little kids, so
one of the things that, I also don't have a lot of expertise in that, but I know that a lot of places start a garden, and having that garden there is actually, so get your hands dirty and start working with things. And even if it's little, those, there's so much there, and that it can be made real for people by actually doing some planting.
But there's a ton out there. You can check, you can Google around. There's a ton out there for Jewish education around ecological stuff for children.
What can Judaism learn from our First Nations of the world regarding care of the land and living in harmony with it?
So I think that it's really critical what is now sort of coming out, because like we're getting more and more of a sense of appreciation of what Indigenous people are bringing to us. And I think that, in fact, Judaism has a lot of the similar kind of things. Like one of the things that we're learning is that like we look at relationships and not just things that are isolated. That's a quality, I think, of Indigenous thinking as well as Jewish thinking. And we look at the whole. You look at all different angles, how everything is affecting everything else. I think so. I think that we can be inspired and work together with Indigenous cultures, because in some ways, I'm not going to say like, is Judaism indigenous or not? Like, I'm not going to go there in that whole question. But I think that like, if we go back to the core concepts of Judaism, there's a lot in common with indigenous ways of looking at the world. And it's about being connected and being in relationship. And that's the main thing. We are not the only ones that count. We are part of this larger whole.
One thing that's really interesting to me is how so many indigenous cultures talk about a creator God, and you hear lots of secular or unaffiliated Jews who will espouse this notion of a creator God, but that don't like it in our tradition. So, I mean, I feel like there's a lot in so much in indigenous traditions that's actually in our traditions, but in our own tradition, but we haven't made that connection.
And one small thing I would add is I think that because of our history as a land-connected people, right, we have a huge amount of our text is about being sacred stewards of having a sacred connection to a piece of land. And I think we can use that history to generate a lot of empathy and solidarity with First Nations people who have sacred connections with the land that we're on now. And so learning how to be in right relationship with them and the land that we're on now through that, I think is important.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I talk about in my book is that specifically the land that our culture sort of grew out of, that land was actually kind of a backwaters. It was hilly, and it was not good for the kind of industrial farming that you had like in Egypt, where you had like a river that was going to overflow. And it taught us a lot of that idea of like relationality and being connected and having to look at all the details and having to be connected to your neighbors and be connected to the details of the land, because it was difficult, hilly land that depended on rain. So that 1,000 years that Judaism had on that particular land, I think taught us a lot of what is core to Judaism to this day.
There's so much more to say about that. I wish we had a whole other seminar.
So as we wrap up, I'm sorry we can't get to all of the questions, but there have been several with people saying that they feel like they don't always feel like they're in community with others doing this. So how do we do that? And others who have not been involved but would like to be involved, where do they start?
Well, I want to offer my empathy to everyone who feels like they're not in community with other people, because I've struggled with this my whole career. So, and just because we're not in community doesn't mean to stop. It just means that we need to keep pushing and keep reaching out and trying to find our way. And like I said, I'm happy to be in touch with anyone about that. And where to start, it really depends who you are. And again, I'm happy to be in conversation to help you find a place to start that's going to encourage you as opposed to discourage you. There's just a million entry points depending on who you are.
Yeah, same here. I'm very happy to be in touch with people and figure out what might be helpful for you. Like, we're all teaching classes. You can join classes online, that I teach through Organic Torah or through the Aleph Ordination Program. We have public classes that people can jump into. Or if you're in, like what Noah did with the Urban Adamah, there are a flourishing of these programs where you can do an internship and go work on a farm. And so there are a lot of folks, doing these things, and there are places, if you start to scratch around, there are ways to connect. And I'm certainly very happy to, as Ellen said as well, talk to people and try and find what fits for you.
And there's a lot of those organizations are named in the Jewish farming story, which is actually how I first came across Rabbi Bernstein's work. And the last thing I would just say, we're at time, is start where you are. There's a great quote in a Martin Shaw book, basically saying, be famous for 5 blocks. If you live in the city, you live in the suburbs, you live wherever you are, you can start in your backyard. You can start in a little, tree island on the sidewalk. But once you start where you are, then you can begin to, it's like the chipmunk, like if you tend to that one tree, then you'll see, you'll begin to be able to trace your own connections, which is what it's all about.
Great. Well, I want to thank Natan and Ellen and Noah for this really fabulous conversation. I'm so pleased we could have it, especially during the holiday of Sukkot. I want to remind everybody that Ellen's upcoming book in February is Toward a Holy Ecology, Reading the Song of Songs in the Age of Climate Crisis. Natan's book is The Pearl and the Flame, A Journey into Jewish Wisdom and Ecological Thinking. I put links to both books in the chat. I will also, as well as how you can reach reach them, and their websites are in the chat, but we will be sending out an email later this week that will include links to this recording to share with others, as well as the books and their websites. Please go to momentmag.com, where you can register for next week's program about how Jewish theater is combating anti-Semitism. Again, thank you everyone for joining us, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.